called me dead weight in front of the team. What he didn't know, I could fire him with a signature. I built this company from behind the curtain. He strutted in thinking he was the main character. So I let him walk right into the meeting where he'd beg me to save his job. My name is Samantha Holt. I'm 38, and I don't look like what people expect when they hear majority shareholder. No power suits, no flashy jewelry, no executive parking spot, just sensible clothes, a modest office, and 9 years of institutional knowledge at Ventrovia Systems. Most days, I'm perfectly content being the head of strategic data analytics at our Denver headquarters. It's a role I created and built from scratch when Ventrovia was still figuring out what to do with the mountains of telecommunications data we were collecting. Back then, we were a promising startup with more ambition than direction. Now we're a mid-sized player in the telecommunications industry with offices in 3 states and partnerships across 2 continents. What most of my colleagues don't know is that in 2020, when Ventrovia was on the brink of bankruptcy during the pandemic, I quietly became the company's savior. Through Halton Equity, my family's investment vehicle, I purchased a controlling 51% stake. The board knew, of course, a handful of executives too, but I insisted my ownership remain confidential. I never wanted the spotlight. I didn't want people treating me differently or questioning whether I'd earned my position. I just wanted Ventrovia to survive and thrive. And for 9 years, it did. Then Mark Dempsey arrived. The first time I saw Mark was in an all-hands meeting where the board introduced him as our new CEO. Tall, with the kind of tailored suit that probably cost more than most employees' monthly salaries. He had an MBA from Wharton and came from a larger competitor where he'd led a successful reorganization initiative. His opening speech hit all the buzzwords: synergy, optimization, cultural reimagining, vertical integration, disruptive innovation. The board members nodded approvingly from the side of the stage. I sat in the middle of the audience, watching carefully as he promised to take Ventrovia to the next level. I believe in lean operations and decisive leadership, he told us, pacing the stage with a wireless microphone. Some changes might feel uncomfortable at first, but I promise they're necessary for growth. After the meeting, department heads were invited to a private lunch with Mark. As we introduced ourselves around the table, his eyes lit up at certain titles: Chief Marketing Officer, VP of Sales, Head of Product Development, and glazed over at others. When it was my turn, I simply said, Samantha Holt, Strategic Data Analytics. His eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Not recognition of my name or understanding of my role. Something else. Dismissal. Perhaps. Data analytics, he repeated. Interesting. I'd love to hear how that fits into our core business model sometime. By the end of his first week, Mark had scheduled one-on-ones with every department head except me. By the end of his second week, he'd brought in 3 strategic advisors from his previous company. By the end of his third week, 2 longtime Ventrovia executives had resigned. I watched from my corner of the company as Mark began his transformation. In meetings, he spoke about fresh perspectives and agile thinking, while systematically sidelining anyone who'd been with Ventrovia longer than 5 years. My team members started coming to me with concerns, whispering about restructuring rumors and new reporting hierarchies. Should we be worried? Asked Raj, my senior analyst. He'd been with me for 7 years, ever since he graduated from Colorado State. Let's wait and see, I told him, even as I began documenting every decision, every email, every meeting that seemed designed to push out the old guard. Not because I intended to act not yet, but because data was what I did best. And something told me this data would matter. I knew Mark would eventually come for my department. We weren't flashy. We didn't generate direct revenue. What we did, analyzing customer patterns, predicting network needs, identifying inefficiencies, was essential but largely invisible. Our value showed up in long-term metrics, not quarterly reports. We were exactly the kind of department that people like Mark, with their short-term vision, didn't understand. The meeting, when it came, wasn't even scheduled. Mark simply appeared at my office door on a Tuesday afternoon, flanked by a young woman I recognized as one of his new hires in HR. "Samantha, do you have a moment?" he asked, already stepping into my office. I closed my laptop. "Of course." He sat across from me, the HR representative hovering by the door. "I've been reviewing our organizational structure," he began, "and I've noticed some redundancies in our data operations." I nodded, waiting. "The thing is," he continued, leaning forward, "I believe we can streamline many of your department's functions into our IT and marketing divisions. It would create a more efficient flow of information." "I see," I said. "And you've analyzed our workflow to reach this conclusion?" A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "I've been in this industry for 15 years. I know what works and what doesn't." "I've been at Ventrovia for 9 years," I countered. "I built this department because it was needed." "Things change," he said. "Companies evolve." "They do," I agreed, "usually based on data." Mark sighed, dropping the pretense of consultation. "Look, Samantha, your team is expensive. The kind of analysis you're doing could be handled by AI tools for a fraction of the cost. In today's market, we need to be lean." My team saved Ventrovia $4.2 million last year by optimizing our network infrastructure, I said calmly. "We identified the customer retention issue in the Pacific Northwest before it affected our numbers. We're the reason our last product launch targeted exactly the right demographic." "And I appreciate that history," Mark said in a tone that suggested the opposite. "But going forward, we need different capabilities." I studied him for a moment. "You're eliminating my position." "We're offering you a transition package," the HR representative spoke up. "It's quite generous." Mark nodded. "Your institutional knowledge is valuable, Samantha, but sometimes fresh perspectives are necessary. The company needs to move in a new direction." Something in me snapped. Not outwardly, I remained perfectly composed, but inside, I'd had enough. 9 years of building something valuable, only to have this man who'd been here 3 weeks tell me it wasn't worth keeping. "Let me understand correctly," I said. "You believe my department is dead weight, a drain on resources?" Mark winced slightly at my blunt phrasing, but nodded. "In terms of our strategic priorities, yes. Some functions are simply more central to our core business than others." I leaned back in my chair. "If you truly believe I'm dead weight, then fire me." His eyes widened slightly. "We're offering you a transition." "No," I interrupted. "If I'm truly a drain on this company, then do what you think is right. Don't hide behind euphemisms and transition packages. Fire me." The HR representative looked uncomfortable. Mark stared at me, clearly trying to determine if this was some kind of trap. "Fire me," I repeated, "right now." Something hardened in his expression, pride, perhaps, or the need to assert dominance. "Fine. Samantha Holt, your position at Ventrovia Systems is terminated, effective immediately." I nodded, stood up, and extended my hand. "Thank you for your clarity." Confused but seemingly relieved by my calm reaction, he shook my hand. "Miranda will walk you through the exit procedures," he said, nodding toward the HR representative. I gathered my personal items, just a few photos and a plant, and allowed Miranda to escort me to her office. As we walked, I texted Karen Bishop, Ventrovia's longtime general counsel and one of the few people who knew about my majority stake. "Mark just fired me, meeting tomorrow." Her response came immediately, "What, I'll call you in 5. In Miranda's office, I signed the preliminary separation paperwork but declined to sign the severance agreement. "I'll need to review this with my attorney," I said. She looked relieved, probably because most people didn't create scenes during terminations. "Of course, you have 2 weeks to respond." I handed in my badge and walked out of the building I'd helped save 3 years earlier. Karen called the moment I reached my car. "Samantha, what happened?" "Exactly what we predicted," I replied. "Mark decided my department wasn't essential. Called us dead weight, more or less." "Did you tell him?" "About Halton Equity, no." There was a pause. "What are you planning to do?" I started my car. "When's the next board meeting?" Friday, Karen said, Mark's presenting his comprehensive restructuring plan. Perfect, I said. Let's not tell the board what happened. I want to see what Mark presents. Karen was quiet for a moment. You want to let him hang himself? I want him to have every opportunity to demonstrate his leadership philosophy, I corrected, completely unfiltered. You're frighteningly calm about this, Karen observed. 9 years of meditation classes, I replied. I'll see you Friday. Over the next 2 days, I watched from a distance as Mark accelerated his changes. 3 more longtime employees were let go. My entire data analytics team was informed they would be reassigned to other departments. Raj texted me that morale was underwater and that the new leadership team was already moving into the vacated offices. On Friday morning, I dressed more carefully than usual. Not in anything flashy that wasn't my style, but in a well-tailored charcoal pantsuit that I reserved for important client presentations. I drove to Ventrovia's headquarters and parked in the visitors section. At the reception desk, the new receptionist I didn't recognize her looked up with a practiced smile. How can I help you? I'm here for the board meeting, I said. Samantha Holt. She checked her computer and frowned. I'm sorry, I don't see you on the attendee list. I smiled. Check the ownership records for Halton Equity, please. Her eyes widened slightly as she made the connection. Oh, I'm so sorry. Ms. Holt. Let me call Ms. Bishop right away. Karen met me in the lobby, her expression a mixture of concern and anticipation. The meeting's about to start. Mark doesn't know you're coming. Good, I said. We took the elevator to the top floor where the boardroom was located. Through the glass walls, I could see Mark standing at the head of the table, presenting slides on the large screen. The board members, 7 men and 2 women, were watching attentively. Karen opened the door, and all heads turned toward us. Mark froze mid-sentence, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. Sorry to interrupt, Karen said smoothly. Ms. Holt is joining us for this discussion. The board chairman, Richard Abernathy, looked confused but nodded. Of course, Samantha, please take a seat. As I walked to an empty chair, I could feel Mark's eyes following me. He cleared his throat and attempted to regain his composure. As I was saying, he continued, Phase 1 of our restructuring has already begun. We've eliminated several redundant positions and streamlined our management hierarchy. I sat quietly, listening as Mark outlined his vision for Ventrovia's future. It was impressive in its confidence, if not its substance. He spoke about cutting legacy costs and outdated methodologies. He presented slides showing projected savings from department consolidations and staff reductions. The Strategic Data Analytics Department, for example, he said, clicking to a new slide that showed my team's headcount and budget, represents a significant expense for functions that can be largely automated or absorbed into existing departments. Richard frowned. That's Samantha's department, isn't it? Mark nodded, glancing at me briefly. Yes. Ms. Holt has already transitioned out of the company as part of our initial restructuring. A murmur went around the table. Several board members looked at me in surprise. You fired Samantha, asked Janet Wu, one of the board members who'd been with Ventrovia since before my investment. We eliminated her position, Mark corrected, along with several others that didn't align with our new direction. And did you consult with the major shareholders about this decision? Richard asked, his tone carefully neutral. Mark looked confident. We're presenting the full restructuring plan today for board approval, which will then be shared with shareholders. Including Halton Equity, Janet asked. Of course, Mark said. Once the board approves, Halton Equity holds 51% of Ventrovia's shares. Richard interrupted. Major personnel changes, especially at the department head level, typically require their consultation. Mark's expression faltered slightly. I was told the board had operational authority for management decisions. Within parameters, Richard said, Samantha, would you like to comment? All eyes turned to me. I opened my briefcase and removed a folder, which I placed on the table in front of me. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said calmly. Mark, are you familiar with Halton Equity? He frowned. It's our majority shareholder, a private investment firm. And did you review the ownership structure of Halton Equity before making your restructuring decisions? That wasn't. He stopped, a dawning realization creeping across his face. What are you saying? I opened the folder and slid a document across the table. I am Halton Equity. Or more precisely, I am the sole owner and president of Halton Equity, which holds 51% of Ventrovia's shares. The room went silent. Mark stared at the document, then at me, his face draining of color. That's not possible, he finally said. You're the head of data analytics. I'm both, I replied. I've been with Ventrovia for 9 years. When the company faced bankruptcy in 2020, I purchased a controlling interest through my family's investment vehicle. I chose to keep my ownership private and continue in my operational role because I believed in the work my team was doing. Mark looked around the table, perhaps hoping someone would contradict me. No one did. So when you fired me on Tuesday, I continued, you weren't just eliminating a department head, you were terminating the majority shareholder of the company. I didn't know, Mark said, his voice hollow. And that's precisely the problem, I replied. You didn't know. You didn't investigate. You didn't analyze. You arrived with preconceptions about what was valuable and what wasn't, and you acted on those assumptions without gathering data. I gestured to his presentation on the screen. Just like this restructuring plan, which is based on generic corporate templates rather than specific knowledge of Ventrovia's operations. Richard cleared his throat. I think we need to take a step back and reassess the situation. Mark, in light of this information, do you want to reconsider your proposal? Mark stood frozen, his career flashing before his eyes. I think we should table the restructuring discussion until I've had a chance to consult more broadly. Actually, I said, I'd like to propose that we place Mark on administrative leave while the board reviews his actions since joining Ventrovia. On what grounds? Mark asked, finding his voice again. Potential ethical violations, I replied, including creating a hostile work environment, selective termination of long-term employees without cause, and failure to perform due diligence before major organizational changes. The board members exchanged glances. We should discuss this in executive session, Richard suggested. Mark looked panicked now. This is completely unprofessional. You can't just walk in here and... I own 51% of this company, I interrupted quietly. I can do exactly that. Richard stood up. Mark, please step outside while the board confers. Samantha, as the representative of Halton Equity, you're welcome to stay. Mark gathered his materials with shaking hands. As he walked past me toward the door, he paused. This isn't over, he muttered. I looked up at him. Actually, it is. That's what majority control means. After Mark left, the board discussed the situation in detail. I presented the documentation I'd been gathering, the pattern of terminations targeting long-term employees, the hiring of Mark's former colleagues into newly created positions, the systematic exclusion of certain departments from strategic discussions. I wasn't planning to intervene, I explained. I wanted to give Mark a fair chance to lead, but his approach wasn't about improving Ventrovia. It was about replacing it with his own vision, regardless of what was already working. After an hour of discussion, the board voted unanimously to place Mark on administrative leave pending an ethics committee investigation. They also voted to reinstate me and my team, with an apology for the disruption. As the meeting concluded, Richard pulled me aside. You could have stopped this before it started. Why didn't you? I considered the question. Because sometimes people need to reveal who they truly are through their actions. If I'd told Mark who I was on day one, he would have hidden his real intentions. This way, the board saw exactly how he operates when he thinks no one can stop him. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Remind me never to play poker with you. When I returned to Ventrovia on Monday, the news had already spread. My team was waiting in our department area. Applause breaking out as I walked in. Raj had kept everyone together over the weekend, assuring them that things would work out. How did you know? He asked me privately. I didn't, I admitted, but I believed the truth would matter in the end. Over the next week, my inbox filled with messages from employees throughout the company, sharing their experiences with Mark, altered meeting invitations that arrived after the meetings had started, sudden changes in reporting structures that left people isolated, demands for unrealistic deliverables followed by criticism when they weren't met. The pattern was clear. Mark had been systematically undermining anyone he saw as a threat or an obstacle. The ethics committee investigation moved quickly. Mark hired an attorney and claimed that everything he'd done was simply standard corporate restructuring. He portrayed himself as a forward-thinking leader who was being punished for trying to modernize an outdated company. The evidence told a different story. Email records showed he'd been building a case against specific employees since his first week. Calendar invitations had indeed been manipulated to make certain people miss crucial meetings. Projects had been reassigned without explanation, leaving longtime employees without meaningful work. 2 weeks after the board meeting, the ethics committee presented its findings. Mark had engaged in a pattern of behavior designed to force out established employees and replace them with his own network. He had acted without proper authority, misrepresented his actions to the board, and created a hostile work environment. The board terminated his employment immediately, with no severance package. In the aftermath, Richard asked me to step in as interim CEO while they conducted a proper search. I agreed on one condition: that I would have the authority to reshape Ventrovia's corporate culture to prevent something like this from happening again. My first act was to reinstate everyone who had been terminated under Mark's brief reign. My second was to establish an anonymous reporting system for employees to share concerns about management practices. My third was to create a set of leadership principles that would be used to evaluate all managers going forward. 1. Decisions must be data-driven, not based on preconceptions. 2. Long-term value creation takes precedence over short-term gains. 3. Institutional knowledge is an asset to be respected, not an obstacle to be removed. 4. Transparency in decision-making is non-negotiable. 5. Power exists to serve the organization, not the individual. 1 month later, the board offered me the permanent CEO position. I accepted on the condition that I could continue to work directly with my data analytics team on strategic projects. Leadership, I told them, should never lose touch with the work that creates actual value. On my first official day as CEO, I had a new sign installed outside the executive suite. It read simply, "Respect is not optional." Mark Dempsey's name quickly faded from Ventrovia's collective memory. What remained was a stronger company with a clearer sense of its values and a renewed appreciation for the people who had built it. As for me, I eventually did reveal my ownership to the entire company. Not because I wanted recognition, but because I wanted everyone to understand that Ventrovia's success was personal to me. I wasn't just an investor looking for returns. I was a colleague who believed in what we were building together. The day after the announcement, I found a handmade card on my desk signed by dozens of employees. Inside was a simple message: "Thank you for seeing our value when others didn't." That card still sits on my desk today. A reminder that the most important data isn't always visible in spreadsheets and quarterly reports. Sometimes it's in the quiet commitment of people who show up every day to build something they believe in. People who deserve leaders who believe in them too. I may not look like what most people expect when they hear majority shareholder or CEO, but maybe that's exactly the point. The best leaders aren't always the ones who seem most obvious. Sometimes they're the ones working quietly in the background, gathering data, building value, and waiting for the right moment to step forward. Mark never understood that. He saw leadership as a position to claim, not a responsibility to earn. He saw people as resources to deploy, not colleagues to respect, and in the end, that blindness cost him everything. I sometimes wonder if he learned anything from his experience at Ventrovia. I hope so. The business world needs fewer people who lead by intimidation and more who lead by example. Fewer who see employees as replaceable and more who see them as essential. Fewer who demand respect and more who work to deserve it. As for me, I still don't wear power suits or flashy jewelry. I still drive the same car and live in the same house. The only difference is that my office is a bit larger now, with a better view of the mountains. But every morning when I arrive at Ventrovia, I make a point of walking through every department, greeting people by name, asking about their work and their families. Not because it's a CEO best practice or because some management book recommended it, but because these are the people who make Ventrovia what it is. They deserve to be seen. They deserve to be valued. They deserve leaders who understand that respect isn't optional. And sometimes, they deserve to watch someone who underestimated them learn a very expensive lesson about the true cost of arrogance. He called me dead weight. He learned I was the foundation. And that, as they say, made all the difference.